Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome, welcome. I'm going to ask everyone to please take a seat. We're going to start now. Hello, hello to the gentleman by the door. I'm going to ask you to please take a seat. Guys in the blue jackets, it'd be wonderful if you would take a seat. Hello, everyone. Please take a seat. We're about to start. It's wonderful that you joined us here on a middle of the day, middle of the week. Welcome to the Alice Mackay Room. We're at the Vancouver Public Library. My name's Jorge Amigo, and I'm the head of cultural programming here. Now, before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are hosting this event from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And I think it's relevant today to share that I'm an immigrant from Mexico, so I'm a settler in these lands, which means I have a special responsibility to continually learn about the ongoing effects of colonialism in this part of the world, and to do every effort that I can to make sure that I integrate that knowledge into the work that I do here as a public servant for you and the people we put on stage. So a quick show of hands, who has been in this room before? Okay, who's here for the very first time? Awesome, welcome. So for those of you who've never been here, the bathrooms are located right outside this door to the right. They're very easy to access. They're right there. I'm going to ask you one favor, though. If you want to use the bathroom or come in and out of the room in general during the event, it's a 2-hour event, so you might want to go out a few times. Please use the back door, because that's less disruptive to the stage. So just try to use that one to come in and out, and leave this one. We're going to keep this one closed. Also, if you can, please take a moment right now to silence your cell phones. You don't need to turn them off at all. In fact, I encourage you to keep them on and to take pictures and videos and post on all your social media. Tell the world that you're at a very cool library event, but just make sure they're not making any noise. And now, like many of you here, I come from elsewhere. And I've always been proud to live in a country with a long tradition of humanitarian work, but also a society that by and large felt like it welcomed immigrants and refugees. But today we're facing a very troubling situation. There's more than 100 million refugees and forcibly displaced people around the world. And this year, our newspapers have been filled with a confluence of humanitarian crises, from the invasion of Ukraine to the armed conflict in Sudan, to a wave of anti-trans legislation in the US, to the situation, the crisis at the US-Mexico border, but also our very own situation in Roxham Road in Quebec. So I think that as we gather today to mark World Refugee Day, we have an opportunity to pause and reflect on the humanitarian role that Canada plays and whether we are fulfilling our treaty obligations to help refugee claimants. So today we're here to hear stories from 2 refugees, then we're going to hear a beautiful performance here, and then we're going to have a discussion on the Canada-US Safe Third Country Agreement, which was just upheld by the Supreme Court last Friday. So before we begin, I want to thank Multi-Agency Partnership BC for their partnership on this event and for helping us shape today's agenda. This event simply would not exist without the support of MAP BC and their hard work, so thank you so much for all the team there. So on that note, I'm going to invite Tan Lam, who is the co-chair of MAP, and Katia Avalos, the Community Engagement Director of MAP, to say a few words.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. I always have to check. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our annual public engagement event in honor of World Refugee Day. It's truly an important day to bear in mind the importance of refugee rights and the ability to seek refuge, seek protection and safety, especially given the recent decision by the Supreme Court to uphold the STCA. It's also an extremely important day because tomorrow is National Indigenous Peoples Day, and as part of our commitment to honor the rights of those who have been displaced, we need to remember that the first peoples who are displaced are the Indigenous nations on the territories of Turtle Island. For those who don't know me, my name is Tan Lam, and I'm actually the outgoing co-chair of MAP BC. Myself, a little bit about myself, my family are also refugees. They came here as part of the Boat People exodus following the Vietnam War. So I myself have been born here, but I do come from a heritage of forced displacement. For the past 2 years, I've had the privilege of being part of MAP BC, also known as the Multi-Agency Partnership for British Columbia. We are a grassroots network of community organizations who work alongside to support refugee claimant well-being as they settle into our communities. One of the ways in which we do this is, of course, public education and engagement. Our goal is really to engage with folks such as yourselves on the unique experiences of refugee claimants and how together we can spark change and create communities that support safety, belonging, and dignity. This is especially important at this time, as Jorge had mentioned earlier, so I'm really excited for this event. The focus really is on us, on together, how we can organize as a community, apply pressure, and advocate for continued commitment to refugee rights. Leading us during this time is, of course, our new Community Engagement Director, Katia Avalos. We are extremely excited to have her. I'm so thrilled that she's part of MAP BC. She's been a longtime supporter of refugee claimant rights, and we just can't think of anyone better to lead MAP BC in this period of time. So join me in welcoming Katia in her new role and for her first World Refugee Day.
Thanks, Dan. That's very sweet. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Katia Avalos, the new Community Engagement Director for MAP BC. Like Tan said, this is my first World Refugee Day event, and it's traditionally been an occasion to celebrate the courage, the resilience of refugees and the contributions that they bring to the countries where they settle. But this year, it feels like there's very little to celebrate. We're going to hear a lot of discussion about the Safe Third Country Agreement, about what it means, about what it will cost to the people who are seeking protection. But I want to situate today's event in a larger context, because historically Canada has allowed refugee claimants, regardless of how they managed to get to Canada, to make a claim and have their have their claim heard by our refugee determination system. And limiting people's ability of making a claim is completely contrary to Canada's values and to its history of welcoming refugees. Like Jorge said, we have the greatest number, over 100 million in forcibly displaced humans around the world, but this is nothing new. Humanitarian crises and refugee crises have shaped Canada. Some of the most diverse and vibrant communities of immigrants and settlers in Canada have come as waves of refugees or refugee claimants in the past. The Latin community that I'm a part of, the Vietnamese community that Tan is a part of, the Jewish community, the Muslim communities, Iranians, the Ukrainian community. The first wave of Ukrainian refugees arrived in Canada in 1891. And that was the first of several. I think this is the 5th wave of Ukrainian refugees seeking protection in Canada. And so if Canada had imposed restrictions as to who can come to Canada and make a refugee claim, what would Canada look like today? All of these communities that are, part of Canada's wonderful cultural diversity would not be here today. And with that in mind, I also would like to highlight the fact that Canada is kind of trying to discourage illegal immigration by forcing people to either come to Canada by air with a Canadian visa or not at all. It is incredibly difficult to obtain a Canadian visa. It is a luxury that most people who are desperately fleeing violence or discrimination are not able to undertake. It is incredibly expensive, so it discriminates against people who don't have the language capacity, the technological savviness, the financial ability to provide Canada with thousands of dollars just to process the visa application, and most likely it will get rejected. I'm speaking from experience. I recently applied for my uncle and his family to come to Canada as a tourist for my wedding, and despite having provided absolutely everything that Canada wanted to and more, their application was refused. So if this is how difficult it is to get to Canada legally, then how can somebody who is desperately fleeing criminal violence, gender-based violence, supposed to put their life on hold and undertake the very complicated process of obtaining a Canadian visa to get to safety? It is not the reality of the world. Desperate people are gonna find a way to get to safety however way they can. And a simple agreement between two countries is not gonna change that reality. We saw the tragic death of about 750 migrants off the coast of Greece last week in a boat that sank off the coast of Greece. And we balk at those numbers, we balk at those events and wonder, why did this happen? How did this happen? Why did these people risk their life, their children's lives, to get on a boat? And that question of what drives people, the desperation, is what is underlying our whole conversation. And we don't have to go as far as Greece. Just days after the STCA changes expansion was announced, 2 families perished on the Canadian-US border when the boat that they were traveling from Canada to the US in this occasion sank, and they all died in the Lawrence River. One of those families had 2 Canadian-born children, a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old. And so this is something that isn't off in Europe or the shores of distant places or in the southern US-Mexico border. It's happening in Canada as well. And people are gonna risk their lives. They're gonna continue to seek ways to get into Canada, and it will just mean that they will be taking riskier paths, relying on human traffickers, and that those deaths that could have been preventable are gonna increase. And is Canada ready to deal with that and have those deaths on their conscience? Those are the issues that are underlying the stories and the discussions that we're gonna be hearing today. So I want you to just keep those things in mind as we hear from our wonderful speakers. One of them is actually also displaying some beautiful art. And without further ado, I think I'm gonna introduce those speakers, Harem Tahir and Sara Maria Lopez. So we're gonna start with Harem. He is Kurdish Iraqi who's been in Canada for 6 years. I had the pleasure of briefly working with him in my former position as a refugee claimant settlement worker. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your story, Harem. Come on up.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me and giving me time to share a little bit of my story. I was thinking yesterday that to write something and prepare some of my story to tell, but then I realized I shouldn't do that because this is something that I will never forget. And usually I would like to speak what is in my heart at the moment. So I was a little bit of myself. I was born and grew up in the middle of war in Iraq, Kurdistan. I was a child that my city, Halabja, was bombarded by chemical weapons, and in an hour, 5,000 people dead. And we then, me and my family, some of the relatives, were lucky to escape through the mountain and go to a neighbor country, which is Iran, and stay there for over 9 years in the refugee camp. Living there in that refugee camp was, to be honest, not easy. It was kind of like prison, and we didn't have any support. That's why children, young, old, women, all need to work. And I was 9 years old that I was working with my father in the brick factory, which is really, really hard work. And but we needed to survive. So we had a really difficult situation, and we start over and over our lives, not only one time, 2 times. It's happening again and again, and still is happening. So after 9 years in living in that camp, we tried to go back to home country and start again from zero, but life there was difficult again. And I was studying, I was graduated from a College of Fine Art, and even at the camp when I was child, my mom told me story about back home and what is back home look like, what is Kurdistan look like, because I was a kid that we left the country. And I tried to recreate my mom's story to drawing or painting, and then I realized that this is something that I would like to continue that way. After coming back to home country, I went to College of Fine Art and graduated from there. And continuing art as a tool to share my story and story of millions of people, not only me. And I was a teacher at the institute, teaching art to students. Then the other crisis that happened, refugee crisis, lots of people from Syria, from different parts, especially Syria, they came to Kurdistan because it was safer for them. So I got involved with the refugee organization that they support refugee, and I was teaching art to children there for over 3 years because I saw those children and remind me myself when I was kid and staying in the camp. And that's how I wanted to support them. Then again, after having a job, after having a good life there, but suddenly I have to again leave the country, and that's how again I came to Canada, start again from zero. And this is something that it is, I've seen that it is happening. Life here for a refugee is much, much more better than some other countries because compared to living in a camp in Iran, it was good for me. And but still, I think refugee needs more support. And I was feeling safe here. I got support, received support from different places, organization, but again, lots of things that refugee needs to go through and struggle with. I was the one that I couldn't speak any word of English several years ago and start from basic. Get in touch with people, learning the system, cultures, and also something that might be not easy. And on the sides, leaving everyone behind, be a part of the family and the one that you love. It is not easy. So that's why this is something I always share in the event like this and even in the art show, because my art, as you see over there, that's still about the refugee, about story of millions of people that they are seeking safety around the world. And I always try to mention this to people and the event that refugee, really they have power, because it is not easy for someone to leave everything behind, the career, the job, friends, family, and start from zero again and again, and having hope. That's the main point, that they have hope, they don't give up, and but they need more support, to be honest. And yeah, this is I think that's from me and my stories, but I hope always we take a look of the refugee in different way, that because nobody wants to leave family, friend, their career, and what they built for years, and come to a new country just for nothing. So unless they forced to leave, and unless there is no safe place for them, nobody wants to put their children on a boat and going to the ocean with the thinking that if they can get to the safe place or no, unless they cannot stay in their own country. Again, thank you so much for this chance, and this is my art over there. I'm still continuing to express and share the stories of myself or refugees to people, and I'm glad that I could collaborate with different projects internationally. Now I'm working with a musician group in US. We have a member from artists from around the world, trying to collaborate together and share the stories from art to people. Share the stories with combining music and painting and art, visual art together, and share with people. Also, been collaborating with the other artists in, for example, Italy and the other places. So this is something that I'm working on it, because I think art is kind of like international languages that I could share with people. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rem. Like I said before, I had the opportunity of very briefly working with Rem at my previous agency, and his story is so illustrative of the stories that a lot of the immigrants in this country and in even these agencies that are support refugee claimants, and we don't know them, we don't know each other's stories, and I feel so much closer to you that you share that, and I really want to thank you for that. And I want to introduce our next speaker, Sara Maria Lopez. She has been in Canada for 10 years. She's also collaborating very soon as the next MAP co-chair for MAP BC. But I will let her tell her story, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Thank you, Katia. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here and for the invitation to share our stories as refugees. I would like to start with saying that my name is Sara Lopez. I arrived in Canada 10 years ago to seek refugee protection. I'm originally from Mexico when I was working as a human rights activist. I fled my country to protect my life. Before arriving here, I made a stop in the States to seek protection. In the States, I experienced one of the most difficult times in my life as an asylum seeker. There, I was held in immigration detention and had no support and no help. Later, I came to Canada hoping I would find protection here. But once here, the Canadian Border Services Agency not only arrested me, but also incarcerated me in the maximum security provincial jail in Alouette, in Maple Ridge. During those days, I had no idea that those years in the States would turn into an immigration church in Canada. So my refugee claim was challenging. And later on, I learned that my refugee claim was considered bare because of the safe third country agreement. And the Canada Border Services Agency stated that I was not allowed to claim refugee protection in Canada. One more time, my path to safety was in danger. I was in immigration detention for a second time in my life. Later on, my refugee claim was approved by the Immigration Refugee Board, but the Canada Border Services Agency appealed the decision. But finally, the federal court dismissed this appeal, and I got my protected person status back in 2014. Once my refugee process was over, I felt that I could make Canada my permanent home. And then, today, I help more asylum seekers like me as part of my job in a nonprofit agency that provides services for mental health. In June 16, the Supreme Court of Canada held that the Safe Third Country Agreement with the states was legal. This issue is still open, even though 10 years ago, right? But there is part of the agreement that can be challenged before the court. So I want to say once again that the United States, it is not a safe country for asylum seekers, especially for those countless people like me and many others that end up detained in immigration detention centers indefinitely, like Canada. As we can see, my case can be from 10 years ago, but the Safe Third Country Agreement is still in place, and it continues to put people's life in danger. It makes me sad that this agreement still stands, but I find hope in knowing that the journey is not over yet, and maybe this will be changed for the better soon. As a part of the nonprofit agency worker that support mental health for refugees and refugee claimants, we know that most of our clients are coming by foot, crossing the Canadian border, as I did. So I know by experience what this Safe Third Country Agreement means. And we need to protect them. It is not because we need to protect the borders, but it's also a life. So it is a human right to protect lives. And we can be part of the problem and also part of the solution, supporting those agencies that provide services for refugee claimants that are in the very last moment and are very vulnerable because of the services that they can get access. And refugee process is very long, could be between 1 year to more than 2 years. So being in the limbo, it is also very anguish for many of our clients. Just keep in mind that every single thing, small thing that you do for a refugee claimant can be the difference for them. Being a refugee is not a choice, but it's a circumstance. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And again, we're so grateful to have you join MAP BC as the incoming co-chair. We'd now like folks to invite and welcome Anas Al-Hassan, a musician, and Bero Sakar, 2 musicians who are going to be performing some songs for us today. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Anas Al-Hassan. I'm originally from Syria, I came as a refugee in 2017, and look at me now, trying. I really thank very much the people who invited us. As a real example, me and my friend Bero Sucker. I will leave some space to introduce himself. But in this day, the Refugee Day, I want to say something. I myself crossed the border from US and come here, settled down, separated for 4 years away from my kids, my family. They fled to Turkey. And now we reunited here under the lovely home called Canada. And we feel safe. We feel free to do whatever we want, to sing again, to live again, and to breathe. Thank you very much for coming over.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bero. I'm also a refugee from Syria. I came here as an international student and applied for refugee status here. Took me around 2.5 years, and now I'm a protected person. So, yeah, I'm also safe and happy. So and I hope we make you happy with some music. We're going to play some Syrian folk music in Arabic, and this is my instrument. It's called an oud. It's a famous, well-played Syrian instrument. It's a Middle Eastern instrument, North African and Eastern European even. Yeah, it's like a fretless guitar, and you play with a risha. So I hope you enjoy it. مالك يا حلوة مالك، هو الغرام غير حالك. مالك يا حلوة مالك، هو الغرام غير حالك. سألوا عليك يا عزالك لما رأوكي بجمالك.
يعني
لما رأوكي بجمالك. مالك يا حلوة مالك، هو الغرام غير حالك. مالك يا حلوة مالك،
هو الغرام غير حالك.
سألوا عليك يا عزالك لما رأوك بجمالك يا عينيا لما رأوك بجمالك انت حياتي وروح قلبي بحبك لكن ايه ذنبي انت حياتي وروح قلبي بحبك لكن ايه ذنبي ما تحطي قلبك على قلبي داوي حبيبك بوصالك داوي حبيبك بوصالك مالك يا حلوة مالك هو الغرام غير حالك مالك يا حلوة مالك هو الغرام غير حالك سألوا عليك يا عزال لما رأوك بجمالك يا عينيا لما رأوك بجمالك سيدي العصاري يا سمك يا بني العب بالمية لعبك يعجبني العب بالمية لعبك يعجبني يا سمك بني صيادك ماهر بياك شاطر وجودك نادر محلاك يا بني وجودك نادر محلاك يا بني يا سمك بني يا مال الشام ويلا يا مالي طال المطار يا حلوة تعالي يا مال الشام ويلا يا مالي طال المطار يا حلوة تعالي لو المطال طال وطول لا بتغير ولا بتحول لو المطال طال وطول لا بتغير ولا بتحول مشتاق لك يا نور عيوني حتى نعيد الزمن الأول مشتاق لك يا نور عيوني حتى نعيد الزمن الأول حتى نعيد الزمن الأول يلا تعالي كفاكي تعالي يا مال الشام ويلا يا مالي طال المطال يا حلوة تعالي يا مال الشام ويلا يا مالي طال المطال يا حلوة تعالي. I swear I tuned it before, but I guess it's the weather or something.
This is a song that talks about the palm tree in the desert and the close friendship. You know, everybody has his bestie, so this is like a kind of talking about the bestie. No love, just friendship.
فوق النخل فوق يابا فوق النخل فوق مدري لمع خده يابا مدري القمر فوق فوق النخل
فوق يابا فوق النخل يابا مدري القمر والله مريدة باليني بلوى
وسلم عليهم عليهم صعبنا الفرقة علي يابا اشتقنا إليهم إليهم والله باليني بلوى والبلبل نغى غصني يا شقيقا النعمان البلبل نغى غصني يا شقيقا النعمان قصدي ألاقي محبوبي قصدي ألاقي محبوبي بين الياسمين والريحان يا عيني بين الياسمين والريحان بتلوع يا وعدي بدي طبيب يداوي قلبي تلوع يا وعدي بدي طبيب يلاقيني دوا الطبيب ما بينفعني دوا طبيب ما بينفعني، شوفت حبيبي تشفيني يا عيني، شوفت حبيبي بتشفيني. قدك المياس يا عمري، يا غصين الجالس كاليسر، قدك المياس يا عمري، يا غصين البانس كاليسر. انت احلى الناس في نظري، جل من سواك يا عمري. أنا وحبيبي في جنينة،
والورد مخيم علينا.
أنا وحبيبي في جنينة،
والورد مخيم علينا.
أنا
وحبيبي في جنينة، والورد مخيم علينا. طلب مني وصاله يا ربي اجمع علينا. قدك المياس يا عمري، يا غصين الباني كاليسر. انت احلى الناس في نظري، جل من سواك يا عمري. We'll take you now to the Gulf area in the Middle East. This is called A Night. ليلة لو باقي ليلة في عمري، أبيه الليلة واسهر في ليل عيونك، في ليلة عمر، في ليلة عمر. ليلة لو باقي ليلة في عمري، أبيه الليلة واسهر في ليل عيونك، في ليلة عمر، في ليلة عمر. ليلة لو باقي ليلة بعمري، أبي الليلة واسهر في ليل عيونك، في ليلة عمر، في ليلة عمر. ليلة لو باقي ليلة بعمري، أبي الليلة واسهر في ليل عيونك، في ليلة عمر، في ليلة عمر. يا الله يا الله يا الله
يا الله،
وش كثر انت جميلة. يا الله
يا الله،
يا الله
يا الله،
وش كثر انا احب، انا احب احلم أحلم بك دايم جنبي وأنا صاح ونايم يلي أيام بدون ما همن العمر ما همن العمر أحلم بك دايم جنبي وأنا صاح ونايم يلي أيام بدون ما همن العمر ما همن العمر الليلة لو باقي ليلة في عمري أبيه الليلة وأسهر في ليلة عيونك في ليلة عمر في ليلة عمر همس بيتي وسفري صوتك وهمسك ليلي وقمري قمرك شمسك بيتي وسهري صوتك وهمسك بيتي وسهري قمرك شمسك بيتي وسهري وانتي يا عيوني انتي قلبي وانا وين ما كنتي يلي ايام بدونك ما همن العمر وما همن العمر وانتي يا عيوني انتي قلبي وانا وين ما كنتي يلي ايام بدونك ما همن العمر ما همن العمر ليلة لو باقي ليلة بعمري أنا بيه الليلة وأسهر في ليلة عيوني في ليلة عمر في ليلة عمر
That was incredible. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. I look forward to bringing you back to VPL for another concert.
For sure.
Thank you so
Inshallah.
much. Let's give him another round of applause. So what we're gonna do now is my team's gonna set up the stage for about 3 minutes for the panelists. In the meantime, I'm gonna ask you all to get to know your neighbors. So turn to the person next to you, have a conversation, get to know who's in the room. I ask you to stay in the room because otherwise it's gonna be hard for us to get you back in. We're back on stage in 3 minutes. So chat with each other.
Hi, everyone. Just one more thing. We have some wonderful art on display from some of our refugee, our speaker Harem, and from Dima, who is from Rainbow Refugee. If you would like to take a look at the pieces of art, Dima's art is also for sale. Thank you.
All right, all right, all right. Let's come back to the audience, please. Everyone, we're going to start the panel conversation in 1 minute. 1 minute, please. Everyone, this is going to be really hard. I get it. Hey, everyone. Let's please sit down again. We are about to start the panel conversation. This is really difficult. Don't make me get out there and round people physically. Everyone who is chatting away, can you please take a seat now? We're going to start the event. Everyone, please take a seat. We can do this after the event, after the panel. Hey, everyone, we will have time to connect after the panel conversation. Please, please, please take a seat. All right, that side's almost clear. I mean, this is part of why we do this, right? So people need to connect. It's great. All right, we are about to start. So, we can do that at the end. So, it is my pleasure to introduce today's panelists. I'm going to introduce them very briefly so that they can get going. Alex Duhaman Mansour is the co-executive director of Rainbow Refugee, and he is the president of the Canadian Council for Refugees. Amanda Assis is the executive member of the Canadian Association of Refugee Lawyers, and she's also a staff lawyer for the Migrant Workers Centre of BC. And then Olamide Olaniyan is a journalist, and he's an associate editor of the TAI, who's been covering immigration and refugee issues for a while. So they're going to chat for about 40 minutes, and then they're going to take questions from the audience. So start thinking about a smart question, and remember, questions are questions. They're not long comments. So please focus on a question. All right, please join me on stage.
All right, nice. Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me right now? Is this good? Okay, cool, perfect. Welcome. My name is Olamide Olaniyan. I am an associate editor at the TAI, which is a magazine that's based in BC. We're here to talk about refugees. The title of the event and the panel is called "The Right to Seek Safety: Is Canada Failing Refugee Claimants?" As you probably know, today is World Refugee Day, and the theme, I believe, from the UNHCR is Hope Away from Home. And then, of course, you know, we also know that the STCA Safe Third Country Agreement decision came on Friday, and I know these two have had their hands full talking about that already, but hopefully we'll, you know, have some time to talk about that as well. I think refugees obviously are front of mind for all of us here, and I'm just really excited to, like, you know, just spend some time focusing on the lives and how to improve the dignity of refugees across the world and Canada's place with that. Of course, we've introduced Alex and Amanda, I just wanted to do a quick land acknowledgement. Just acknowledge that we are having this event on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and I think I speak for all of us here that we understand their complexities and kind of contradictions in the work of providing refuge on land that is not our own, and to people fleeing the effects of like colonial projects, that Canada is part of, and under a system that continues to dispossess and oppress Indigenous peoples here. That history and present reality, I guess, puts us in solidarity with Indigenous peoples across the world. Just want to turn our attention to the subject at hand, which is, I think I want to start with first just the question of like, who is the refugee, right? And what makes a person, why would a person leave their home and most of what they've ever known, comfort and safety, comfort and familiarity for a place that is unfamiliar, and risk their lives for that. I want to direct that question to Alex first.
Thank you, Ola. Hello, everyone. We are really, it's strange times today because we just received, like Ola was saying, the decision from the Supreme Court on Friday. And I just want to say just very briefly about that the Supreme Court decision held the appeal in part. So not everything is lost, so I don't want to put like a very doom consideration about what's going on today. It just means that the battle continues. And we will talk a little bit more about that. But thank you for that question, Ola. And I also wanted to recognize first how the same conditions that the colonial project has created here for indigenous communities here have created also abroad in many other places in the world. And so just to frame the conversation, is Canada failing refugee claimants? The short answer is yes, we are, because we are also creating the root causes for displacement, and then we are putting obstacles for people to be able to access refugee protection. So in short, we are failing refugee claimants. And what is a refugee, which is a good question? Well, a refugee is a person, a regular person who's living a regular life in their home country, and due to circumstances that may be of political nature, religious nature, because of their LGBTQ identity, because there's a war, because of climate change, there's so many reasons why a person then is forced to flee, and that's what is called forced displacement. And this person, to be considered a refugee, needs to be outside of their country of origin, so that's part of the definition of what a refugee is. They need to be externally forcibly displaced, and they need to have a well-founded fear of persecution. Actively, their human rights have to be violated, or there's an active persecution or circumstances that do not allow them, or they're not willing to avail of the protection of their home country. So that is pretty much what the framework of what a refugee is. But I want to say that today, and I want to pass it then to Amanda to talk a little bit more, but I want to say that today there's over 100 million people who have been displaced. And many of them are internally displaced and many of them externally displaced. There's 35.5 million people who have been externally displaced at this time. And I want to leave you with another stat before I give the word to Amanda, is to say that although in the world 30% of the population are children, 40% of forcibly displaced people are children. So there's an overrepresentation of children. So I want us to leave a little bit to think about what that means. We usually think of adults sometimes when we're thinking about refugees, but refugees are people who have all ages, all sexual identities, all genders, all professions. There is no real discrimination with regards of who is a refugee in that regard.
Thanks, Alex. And thank you all for being here. Thank you so much also for those presentations before us. I feel like I speak for all of us and maybe all of you that I could have just listened to the music for the rest of the hour than listening to us. But I really appreciate this conversation and being here with both of you. And I feel like I'm very happy for Alex to share your wisdom with us and to hear from you. I want to just reiterate, I guess, the same thing that both of you already said, just with respect to the tension around the work that I do and knowing our colonial history and how difficult and that tension that's very alive for me, welcoming people and trying to help families navigate their own immigration journeys to this land, and how do we welcome people on colonized land, and also acknowledging, of course, Canada's contributions to people having to flee your countries. And so just to reiterate that, in terms of who is a refugee, I think Alex covered that quite well. And I just would add one thing, and that's that in our immigration law in Canada, we have two sections of our act that cover what it means to be a person who needs protection or who is a refugee. Our domestic law incorporates international law. So the 1951 Refugee Convention does include a definition of what is a refugee, which Alex outlined. And in Canada, we also have another section of our act that outlines what it means to be a person in need of protection. So if you don't fit under the definition of the Refugee Convention, but are still fleeing persecution based on risk to your life or cruel and unusual punishment in your country, Canada does still recognize you as a person in need of protection. And so those of you who've been through the process will know that there is a distinction in our law. And I raise that, I guess, just to say that, part of, I think, what we will talk about under the Safe Third Country Agreement is that there are different definitions or parameters that have been put on domestic interpretation of international law in Canada and in the United States, and that was part of what formed the challenge under the Safe Third Country Agreement, that in Canada we have a much broader definition of some kinds of refugee claims than the United States, and that's part of the decision that's going back to the federal courts, but just foreshadowing there for you.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. A lot of really interesting things that came out of that, just the number of forcibly displaced people in the world, and then also that tension between the U.S. and Canada, and how having an agreement that is supposed to regulate both of their refugee processing might not necessarily be in line with each of their own constitutional responsibilities, I guess. I had a question for you, Amanda, which was about in your work as an immigration lawyer, could you talk to me about your first interaction with the Safe Third Country Agreement, just the first time you ever came in contact with that, and just tell me what that experience was like, and what did you see when you first interacted with that?
Interesting question. I think maybe my first interaction would have been during law school, actually, just following the case when it was being first initially challenged, because
what year was that?
Oh, when? Sorry, 2005, and then it worked its way through the courts, 2007, and that's not even. I was not even in law school yet, so it was before law school.
But one of the challenges, you were in law school, and
the second challenge began. No, I wouldn't have even been. But anyways, and it doesn't matter where I was doing, what I was doing. but yeah, just I guess following. I've always been very interested in immigration and refugee issues. So. But as a practicing lawyer, I guess more importantly, we do come across people who have crossed the border irregularly, and then, or not irregularly, pardon me, who have presented themselves to a port of entry and have attempted to make a claim for refugee protection, and then are turned away. I have also done work, I guess, with those who have qualified under an exemption to the Safe Third Country Agreement, and then that creates challenges if a person is not recognized as a refugee at the Refugee Protection Division, then the appeal rights actually are non-existent for those who have been able to enter Canada under an exemption. But yeah, I guess what I would say is just, a lot of the work that I've done has been with the Canadian Association of Refugee Lawyers, and in solidarity with the organizations that were challenging the second time around. And you do hear, and I think probably many of you in this room have either experienced this or have heard these stories or worked with people who have faced very significant challenges because of the Safe Third Country Agreement, being returned to the United States, being detained in the United States, families, people not knowing perhaps that they even meet one of the exemptions under the Safe Third Country Agreement. And I think for me, I find it particularly troubling to hear our government talk out of one side of their mouths about their commitment to refugee protection, their commitment to migration, and their commitment to being a leader internationally in the humanitarian field. And then on the other hand, being congratulated for expanding the Safe Third Country Agreement in March of this year, and really, I think, dehumanizing the very human impact that's happening at the border between Canada and the United States.
Yeah.
Sorry, I could keep going, but
You can keep going now. Could you talk a little bit more about like kind of like that impact or like the implications that this basically a barrier that was put in place and has an effect on irregular and also like regular migration, right? What happened, I guess, when it first was put in place, and then like what is going to happen now that this part of the agreement has been upheld and other parts have been like put to the lower courts and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm just going to do like 1 minute, and then you should. But I guess just to take us a step backwards, the right to claim asylum is an internationally recognized right. So Canada was one of the founding members of the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. And in that, in our, I guess, founding sort of international principles with respect to international human rights, there is a right to seek safety and a right to seek asylum. So that, from a sort of much broader international perspective, that is an international norm that is something that Canada is a signatory to and something that guides our international and domestic law. This Safe Third Country Agreement, when it was implemented, although it seems it is not in violation of Canada's commitments under international law, I want to just say that we often hear in the news that there was a loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement and that this is part of what was being changed in March of this year. But from my perspective, I really think that the Safe Third Country Agreement itself was a loophole in international law and in Canada's international commitments. The Safe Third Country Agreement is a bilateral agreement, I'm sure we all know, between Canada and the US that requires whichever country a person first lands in or requires a person to make a refugee claim in the first country that they land in from their country of origin between Canada and the United States. And I think it is very, what's the word? I guess rich for Canada to, suggest that like we are an equal party to this agreement when we're a very difficult country to get to. Our border, we have one land border only with the United States, and people who are traveling, having to flee their countries, making these incredible journeys, which sometimes, when I meet with people, to just listen to how people were able to get from one place to another and eventually to Canada is just mind-blowing. So, I think really the agreement, it restricts what I think our commitments are under international law, which is to guarantee the right for everybody to seek protection in another country. And of course, the bilateral agreement is in place. One of the basic principles of it, and a basic principle, I suppose, of international law, when it comes to refugees and our commitments, is the principle of non-refoulement, which is that we commit to not returning people to persecution in their country of origin. And so this agreement between Canada and the United States exists, and with that principle built into it, that that we designate countries only that we recognize that have a similar refugee determination system that commits to not this principle of non-refoulement, which the United States does, at least in paper. And so now I'm losing track of what I was going to say next. But anyway, so that's the Safe Third Country Agreement.
No, I think what you're on is actually really interesting about kind of there's these international laws, domestic laws that govern like the rights of refugees, and but there's also like a lot of ostensibly, or you could argue that countries could say that they have all these rights and all these safety valves to protect the rights of refugees and stuff, but just given news about abuse and like immigration detention and stuff, like maybe that might not be true, and that might have to, we might have to rethink our relationship to this agreement, right? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's part of the, do you want to talk about like, the actual challenge itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So the agreement, like Amanda was saying very well, just limits people's ability to come to Canada and make a refugee claim. They have to, if they land in the US, they have to make a claim there unless they meet an exemption. The exemptions are not many. They're hard to meet. Some people don't have any idea that they have an exemption and that an exception to it, and that they can actually claim that. And they're being returned now very fast at the border. And the other thing I wanted to emphasize also with regards to international law, that it's not only the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that protects the rights of refugees. There's multiple international instruments, like the 1951 Convention, Geneva Convention, the Protocol of 1967 also protects the Covenant of Political and Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant, also the Convention Against Torture and other degrading treatments. And then there's regional conventions, the European Convention of Human Rights, the American Convention of Human Rights, the African Charter. So it is a right that it is regulated and protected very fearfully by the international instruments. However, the right to protect your border and not let people in is not protected, and it's not an international human right. So that's what we're balancing. What we're balancing here. And the reason behind that is because the right to life actually has more weight. And when you are comparing rights, when you are comparing human rights, the right to life, the right to freedom, the right to security of the person, and equality really has more weight than the other ones that are being put forward by the government. And then the other thing I wanted to comment on that is that when this agreement was signed, which the first time this agreement was signed was in 2004, it was only supposed to be enacted, so people who were coming to ports of entry then were being turned away to the United States. And because port of entries are considered regular crossings, then people who were crossing irregularly, so at other places that were not designated points of entry, were allowed to come into Canada and claim asylum. So now in March, we have an extension of the Safe Third Country Agreement, so that came into force on, we found out
Trudeau and the government renegotiated the agreement with the Americans and basically extended the agreement across the entire land border, including Quebec as well.
Exactly,
right? Yeah.
That's what it did, and this was told to us, the people who are actually working, the day before, and then it was enacted on midnight. So we didn't have time to prepare the people, to tell them what was going on. Many people were already at the border and were being turned back. And the consequences of that is that now people are going to continue to try to cross the border. That is not going to stop. But now they're going to do it in much more unsafe conditions. They're going to be much more vulnerable to traffickers. So there's a lot of people who also are going to benefit from this in trying to find ways to smuggle people in. And then the other thing is, if you do make it to Canada, you can seek asylum if you seek asylum on day 15 after you enter Canada. So what this means is someone who has entered Canada through an irregular, very hospitable and risky situation, then has to find a way to keep in hiding for 14 days before they can seek asylum. And what happens during those 14 days? You have no access to health care, so if something happens to you, if you have to go to the hospital, what would happen then? If you have to seek any protection of any kind, what would happen then? Who is actually hiding you? Are there conditions of safety or not? So the situation, and Canada has portrayed this and said that this is because, we want to stop the irregular crossings because irregular crossings are unsafe for people. But the actual truth is that irregular crossings were created by the original agreement. So the extension of the agreement wants to solve a problem created by the original agreement, and it will not solve it, but it will make it worse. And it will just put people at risk and actually deter many of the people that are trying to cross. And I think you had a question about what was the difference between the U.S. and Canada around that?
I think I was just going to quickly interject with like what Immigration Minister Sean Fraser said, which was that on Friday that Canada has resettled more refugees last year than any other country, and that they just want migrants to come through normal pathways, right? And like that rhetoric of resettlement, and I wanted to kind of like maybe just like adjust the conversation to like that.
Sure.
The rhetoric, I guess, by the federal government and how you both see that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's a really, really important topic because we do as a country have, it almost feels like, I mean it is, I guess, very different sort of asylum systems. We have a resettlement system where, you know, the government of Canada goes and accepts refugees or picks refugees from those who are already outside of their country overseas waiting for resettlement, working in conjunction with UNHCR. Many of you may be part of groups that also are authorized to sponsor refugees from abroad during the beginning of the crisis in Syria, when you know, there was a lot of movement among Canadians and families to sponsor families from Syria to come to Canada. So there is this sort of whole resettlement side of our asylum and refugee system that somehow feels, or is at least spoken of, as more legitimate than the other side of our refugee system, which is the you know, the one that I interact with much more frequently, and that's people who are, by some miracle, I will repeat, managed to get out of their country, managed to get to this continent, managed to make it to Canada, and then make a refugee claim, you know, either at the border or now much more complicatedly once they've been able to get inside of Canada and find someone to help them make that claim. And I do see a tension between these two systems, and I find it's very troubling, I would say, and very dangerous for the government to be sort of using that language, I think, in terms of suggesting that one way that people come here is more legitimate than another way. And a big factor, I think, for us in Canada is that we're a very difficult country to get to. It's so difficult to get to Canada. I can't remember who was speaking. I think Katja was speaking about the fact that, you know, even if you try to apply for a temporary resident visa from a country where you require a visa to come to Canada, we have a huge refusal rate for countries on temporary resident visas, depending on where you're coming from. But it is, you know, it is a very difficult country for people to come to.
And backlogs, of course, and like
backlogs,
just like bureaucracy and yeah.
Yeah, and you know, it is. I think it also just like very, very dependent on where people are coming from. So those countries where people are, you know, where there may be civil unrest in a country or where there may be more issues around safety, we make it impossible for people to come here on any temporary resident document. And then we still talk negatively when someone miraculously is able to get out of Afghanistan, travel to Brazil, you know, walk or make their way through the United States all the way up to Canada, and somehow there's this language that suggests that that's less legitimate than, you know, sitting and waiting in a refugee camp to be resettled. And I think we need to challenge that and push back on that very aggressively.
Yeah. Do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I want to say that this idea that Canada takes more refugees than anyone else is false. And I want to say it really very, very, very directly, because it is not true. First of all, the countries that take most refugees right now are Turkey, Colombia, Germany, Iran, and I'm missing out on a fifth country. Those are the countries that have and are hosting most refugees today, and that has to do a lot with geography as well. When there's a conflict in a geographical area, people tend to go to the neighboring country, and that's where people are then refugees and seeking asylum, etc. So we are not the top country that takes the most refugees, and we need to be aware of that. The second thing is that Canada sets yearly a target number of how many people they are going to be receiving in the immigration system in general, but also as refugees, as asylum seekers and as resettled refugees. And those numbers are very, very low.
Do you have access to those numbers?
Sorry?
Do you have access to those numbers?
Well, for instance, right now, I don't remember exactly, but for instance, we can say there will be like around 200 and something thousand people that might be accepted in a particular year. Maybe it's more or less than that. And then asylum seekers, although you can't control, through the levels plans, you cannot control who is crossing the border. It's through these agreements that you're controlling who's crossing the border. Roxham Road, usually around 40,000 people cross the border on a yearly basis. But then you're not allowed to land. So maybe you become a protected person, but the amount of people that are able to become permanent residents is so small that you have to wait 5 to 10 years. So there's many ways in which our immigration system actually does not allow people to receive full protection and be fully welcome here in Canada. And the resettlement system is a system that it is not comparable to the asylum seeker system. We need to talk about them separately. Both are needed. Both are absolutely needed. Both should be working towards us providing protection and welcoming people, but the numbers that we are able to do in one should not be used to say, look how many people we welcome when we're turning people away at the border. That is not acceptable from the minister, to be honest.
Thank you very much. I wanted to kind of like just, I don't know how much time we have left, but I wanted to like let the audience get a chance to like ask a few questions, maybe one or two or something. How much time do we have? Okay, for free for all. Okay, cool. Does anyone have any questions so far? Thank you very much. Do we have a roving microphone, or you can just ask the question? Okay, sounds good. Perfect. Okay, I'll try to repeat it as well after.
Something that's really disturbed me since Friday, and this is like a grade 9 civics question, is what is the separation between the legislature, the executive, and the courts? I am so concerned that because of the timing of the Biden-Trudeau agreement, the extension of the STCA, and the results coming out from the Supreme Court, that there has been some kind of influence, even if it's unconscious. Can you assure me that, and you're telling me today that there is a possibility of a road ahead, which is wonderful news. Can you assure me that that separation is always in the mind of folks? It will happen?
I'm just going to repeat the question real quick, which is what is the separation between the Canadian courts and the federal executive, the executive branch? I think there is seems to be a little bit of pressure or just the timing of things that make it so that there is less trust in that separation. Did I get that right? Okay, perfect. Yeah.
I think that there is a political connection when the extension of the agreement was negotiated and then communicated to us. That's just the executive. When the extension of the agreement in March, and I think it had to do with appeasing certain provinces that were complaining about the amount of people that they had to receive, and that they were not having like resources being shared with them from the federal government to be able to receive the refugee claimants. And in that complaint, those same provinces were like, we are welcoming Ukrainian refugees, come, we will get. Those same provinces had one rhetoric around one population and a different one for a different population. And I think that was political. When that was announced, how it was announced. I do believe there is a separation, and that might be because I'm also a Chilean lawyer and I've been taught that. And so I do believe that there is a separation between the judiciary and the executive, and I would never dare to say at this point, no evidence whatsoever that there was undue influence between the executive towards the judiciary. And I think that the judiciary was just dealing with Justice Brown who I don't know if we heard, but had some mischiefs down in the U.S. and then he was one of the justices.
The context is there is apparently I think there was a charge in America and somebody accused him of attacking and
like harassing someone,
somebody
and
yeah.
and he ended up resigning so he wouldn't have to go through that, and he was part of the decision. So the same day that they actually said this justice is resigning, here's the Safe Third Country Agreement decision. I do not. We actually thought, based on the leaning thinking of the justices, that we were going to get a full no. Like, people were tending to think, they're going to say that it doesn't violate Section 7, which is the right to life, freedom, and security of the person, and that was going to be it. But actually, they said, they were much more nuanced around that, and what they said was, yes, we at this point don't believe there is an infringement of Section 7 because although we do believe that there's possibilities of human rights being violated down in the US, there are safety valves that exist in which they can be assessed by an officer at the border and not send people to danger in the US. Those safety valves in practice do not exist, just is in law, but it doesn't exist in practice. But what they did say was, we do believe that there's no hierarchy of rights and that the lower court should have looked at Section 15, which is equality of rights, and because they didn't, we are sending back this case to the lower court so that the court can now assess the constitutionality of this agreement being compared to Section 15, which is equality right, in the ways in which it affects particularly women and gender diverse people who are crossing the border and who have been survivors or victims of gender-based violence. So we do have a glimmer of hope there in that may produce, but it's a court system, so it's slow. But to answer again, I don't think that there is undue influence. I don't know.
Your
Amanda,
your answers as lawyers is that you both have trust in the judicial institutions, right? And then, right?
Well, there is a separation now.
Yeah.
Maybe Amanda thinks differently, but can you say that people are absolutely neutral, that a judge is not paying attention to the news, that they don't go to dinners where they talk to people in politics? No, but can we say that we know for a fact that there has been influence? No, we cannot.
Amanda?
Say that.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, I would flip it and just say I think it was really bad timing for the government. I think the courts take time and deliberations take time, and my concern was more, why would the government do that before hearing the decision? But
cool. Any other question? Oh, sorry, my bad. Sorry. What's the difference between what's the difference between asylum seeking and the asylum system and the resettlement programs?
Yes. So
That's the question, right?
a resettle. You know how the word is resettle, and so if you think about that, it's a person who's already being settled somewhere, and then they're being brought into a country. So, for instance, the person to be able to qualify to be resettled into Canada, they have to be a refugee somewhere. So for instance, an Iranian who is in Turkey complies with that definition. They are a refugee in Turkey. So while they're a refugee, maybe an LGBTQ person may not have a durable solution in Turkey, may not be able to completely fulfill or be safe from persecution in Turkey. So what happens is, like, we find them a durable solution and we take them from Turkey and we put them in a country where they can have that durable solution. That's the resettlement program, and it has much more complexity. The asylum seekers are people who are seeking protection for the first time in the country that they are arriving to. So that's the difference, and I don't know if that was understood, but it's for the first time seeking asylum. And
I think I'll ask. You can speak out. Can you speak out loudly? Or yeah, okay. Thank you so much.
In your opinion, how liable do you think parties will be for harboring asylum seekers in those first 14 days before they're allowed to make a claim?
In your opinion, what was the word again? Liable, do you think the parties, so I guess the federal parties, okay. I see. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, and I think it's a question that I don't know the answer to, and I don't know if we know the answer to yet. It was certainly a concern, I think, that many of us raised at the time that the Safe Third Country Agreement was expanded in March. And you know, even I think beyond that, like how do we help people show that they've been in Canada for 14 days, and how could we expect people to you know, hide themselves for 14 days if they've managed to make it across the country, or across the border, sorry. So I don't have an answer to that. I think it is a real live concern, for sure. You know, at this point, I think we are still waiting to see how the agreement, the expanded protocol, is being implemented. Certainly people are being returned at now who have tried to come up through Roxham Road or through ports of entry. But yeah, I don't have an answer to that.
Alex?
Yeah, we don't really know. And this is a great question because a lot of shelters are also asking this question. So what do we do? Like, are we able to have people in our homes or have people in shelters? What is that going to look like? Are we going to be liable? More than liable, it would be like, is the government going to come after us? Not for money necessarily, but even criminal charges. We are not aware what the consequences might be. That we have asked, and there has been no indication on the part of the government that they are going to try to pressure organizations into not providing refuge to those people, and that they're not. We keep asking, and they keep avoiding the answer to the question. So we are not, we don't know. That's the answer. Now, I would suggest that if you are part of an organization who wants to maybe provide some supports to people who are in that in-between stage, that you do have, do you consult with maybe your organization already has a lawyer to see how you can do that if you are, or if you're willing to take the risk, but that would be for the organization to assess.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. I think we had a question from you. So the question was that humanitarian crises, we've seen that the Canadian government has the political will to move in the direction of protecting people who need haven, and you're noting the tension that seems to be there with systemic racism and how that kind of political will doesn't seem to exist for other types of refugees, right? Yes. Okay, perfect. Either of you want to kind of talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah. So I'm just going to be open and direct to say that our refugee system is racist. Our institutions are racist. there is systemic racism in Canada, and it permeates all our institutions and government institutions. And even though we might think that we are not as racist as other people, and playing that game is really not a good game to play, it is infiltrated all over in our institutions. And that you can see, and there is even a report that was written by IRCC, which is the immigration agency here in Canada, that was written by IRCC that actually talks about racism within IRCC to its own officers, but also in the way the officers make determinations about who comes in, who gets detained at the border, who gets sent indefinitely, who is perceived as dangerous, who's perceived as a person who's going to flee. All of those are perceptions, and racism plays a part. So also in the public perception, when we say we welcome Ukrainians, for instance, it was like, in a way, what I want to bring it is to the fact that, oh, this is a person like us that is being persecuted. This is not an other. In a way, in the perception of the minds of people. And so, of course, we have to do something, and we have to, but this brown person, this black person, it's like another. I don't get to feel the pain in the same way that I do when I identify with the person who's being persecuted. So all of those things play out in an individual basis, and it play out in the institution. Is there political will? When there is political will, can there be effective? Yes, they can. When there's political will, there's resources that are being put in. When there's political will, not only resources, but there's creativity. Like, we're going to use a TRP, which is a temporary resident permit, to allow people to come. We're not even going to assess them abroad. We're going to allow them to come, and once they're here, we're going to assess them because they're in danger. Now, let's not even compare asylum seekers to Ukrainians. Let's compare the situation in Afghanistan with the situation in Ukraine, which are comparable, and how the government reacted to both of those situations. And how, until today, even people who were working at the Canadian embassies and putting their life in danger have not been able to come to Canada in safety, and nothing has really been done to make sure that they are here in safety. So many reasons, one of them systemic racism for sure. So I just want to affirm that what you are observing is absolutely right.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Just to agree. Just to agree and to say that, that we have seen that what Canada can do when it comes to Ukraine, and that as a public, we should be pushing the government anytime there's other crises that are happening. I mean, there's lots currently ongoing in the world, but, I think they've shown us what they can and will do.
The outcomes of those, yeah.
And so, it's, I think, not to say that we shouldn't be doing what we're doing for Ukraine, but that we should be doing that for other places as well.
I'm getting cues that we might have more time, and I believe I had someone who wanted to ask a question. Could you go ahead?
Yeah. So my question is about Vancouver as a sanctuary city.
Okay.
What's the status of that, given this new government, et cetera, and what does that mean for the people in Vancouver who may want to harbor?
So the question was, what is the state of Vancouver as a sanctuary city, and what does that mean for refugees or asylum seekers who are hoping to claim asylum in Canada, I guess? Yeah.
So how it's framed is access without fear. That's how it's framed. In other places, it's framed like a sanctuary city, etc. But here it was framed as having access without fear. It never completely became a city where you can have access without fear, because still until today, and I'm just going to give one detail and that debunks everything else, the VPD, so the Vancouver Police Department, still has a very close relationship with CBSA, which is Canada Border Agency, and they do report people who don't have status or any kind of migration status that they believe may not be irregular. They do report them to CVSA, and CVSA then can pick them up, can detain them, can inquire about their status. So that is with BPD. Now, I'm not sure how those interactions work with the city services. The access without fear is supposed to also be that when you're trying to access a service, they're not supposed to ask you for your status whatsoever or record that in any place. And I'm not sure in practice if that is actually being followed or not. But just the fact that the police department reports to CVSA and actually has quotas that they fulfill every year about how many people they report to CVSA. It just tells you that there is no access without fear in Vancouver today.
Just to pick up on, there are, I would say that it is true that Vancouver is not a sanctuary city. The school boards have been doing some, depending on where, I think, there have been some school boards that have stopped asking for immigration status, or at least registering students who don't have immigration status. The health authorities similarly are supposed to not be reporting to CBSA when people come in without status. Sometimes I think they still are. The city services, I think, in some areas are implementing those policies a lot better than others. But I think, as Alex said, as long as the police are not on board, you'll never have true sanctuary.
Cool. Thank you very much, both of you. Do we have any other questions? I will want this to just go through any questions that we have. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll bring something up. So one of the issues with the Safe Third Country Agreement is that we are saying, or the Supreme Court has unanimously said, that the U.S. is a safe country for refugees, comparable to Canada, and they are afforded certain protections. That is the reason why we're maintaining the Safe Third Country Agreement. And at the same time, one of the protections that Canada affords to refugee claims that the U.S. does not is for gender-based discrimination, right? The U.S. currently, LGBTQ rights are under attack absolutely in several U.S. states. And at the same time, Canada is saying, if you're an LGBTQ refugee, go back to the states, you'll be safe there. What is your opinion about that?
So the question is based on Friday's Supreme Court decision, which dismissed the Section 7 that says Section 7 challenge that this is going to be hard. Challenge that basically says that there are safety valves that protect against abuse of rights and stuff. And then the second one, which was kind of upheld and sent back to the lower courts, was about equality under the law. And I think the question was about particularly gender-based, people fleeing gender-based violence. And I was hoping that you could talk more about that, basically. The question is, you could talk more about those two decisions, I guess, yeah.
Yes, the first thing I want to say is that the Supreme Court did not say that the U.S. was a safe country. They didn't actually, it is implying that it is a safe country, but they're not really saying explicitly the U.S. is a safe country. What they're saying is, we understand that there is a potential human rights abuse or abuse of the rights of refugees in the U.S. for certain people in certain circumstances, but there are safety valves here in Canada that can impede from that person being sent to the U.S. if an officer believes that they might be at risk of being deported, refoulement, like Amanda was talking about, et cetera, et cetera. And we are saying, no, they do not exist in practice. So yes, there is a perception but the government is saying that. The government is saying, the U.S. is a safe country, la, 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 la. Almost like we're not hearing anything that you have to say. It is a safe country. And what you're saying is very true, which is, how can a country be safe for migrants and refugees when they're not safe for their own citizens? How can a country be safe for trans and gender diverse people when they're enacting laws all across the country to attack the rights of LGBTQ and trans people? You cannot assert that in, really ethically stand up and say, no, we believe the US is a super safe country, where even if I'm a US citizen and I'm a black person in the US, I'm not safe. If I am a trans person in the US, I'm not safe. Not only because of society, which we're seeing a rise of really transphobia and homophobia, not only in the US, but also here in Canada. If you go to the North Shore, you will see going through the bridge, there's anti-trans things being posted all over. So it is also here, but we are at least not enacting laws yet that are attacking the rights of trans and LGBTQ people. So in that way, I want to say, it is it is appalling to think that it is a safe country. We have said multiple times it is not. And particularly, like you say, for people who have suffered gender-based violence, because they don't have the same safety that they will have here, or go through a process that will actually consider, like here in the IRB, and you can talk more, there's a guideline about gender-based violence. There's a guideline about how to assess a person who's an LGBTQ and who has suffered persecution based on those identities, that are pretty progressive, because we have worked, the organizations who work on these issues have worked with the IRB to create those guidelines. Those guidelines do not, I don't think, exist in the US, and people are treated in much more. I'm not really saying that here we're perfect at all, but just in comparison, it's a difference, and I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, just I guess to pick up on that, the way that gender-based persecution or claims based on gender-based persecution are adjudicated in Canada is much broader and much more in line with the United Nations, with the UNHCR guidelines. Whereas in the United States, the courts have actually restricted the kinds of refugee claims that will be accepted, and do not actually accept claims based on gender-based persecution in the same way that Canada does. And so that was part of the challenge under Section 15 of the Charter, that those that are being sent back to the United States will not be treated equally, because Canada's system is much broader in terms of gender-based persecution. And so that is going back to the federal court. I think that is a good news. That is part of the good news, or the good news from the decision. And I think part of what we need to remind ourselves, that the courts didn't, that they did uphold part of the appeal, and that's the part of the appeal that there is still a chance that this case will work its way through. This agreement could still be found unconstitutional on those grounds. And it is an important distinction between the legal systems in the United States and in Canada. I just want to say one other thing about these safety valves. So the court, I find this so frustrating. You see this over and over again with government lawyers talking about the safety valves that exist in our immigration and refugee system. And for anyone who's ever had to apply for humanitarian and compassionate consideration, for what's called a temporary resident permit, for these kinds of applications, you will know that it is virtually impossible to make those applications in a minute at the border when you're being faced with return to the United States. They're very, very, very labor-intensive applications that take months, years, even sometimes to process. So this idea that there is indeed discretion built into our immigration system. There is discretion from the minister to grant these kinds of this discretionary relief, but in practice, on the ground, it does not happen that way. And it's really frustrating to hear government lawyers arguing that those are, in fact, remedies that are available to refugee claimants at the border.
And then just one thing about that is that the Canadian Council for Refugees, Amnesty International, and the Canadian Council for Churches, who are the three organizations who have actually brought these legal challenges since 2005, and then in 2017, and we will continue to give this fight, and we're not, even if then the Supreme Court says no again, we will continue to give this fight, because the government can't withdraw from the agreement no matter what the court says anyway. So we are continuing to call on the government of Canada to withdraw from the agreement. And you can do something about that as well.
Yeah, so the choice of, just to wrap it up, the choice of renegotiate, suspension, or even complete removal, that is all within the Canadian government's court, and that shared responsibility lies with them, right?
Exactly.
Okay, perfect. I wanted to wrap up. I know we have out of time, but I wanted to thank you both for being here with me, and thank the VPL, Vancouver Public Library, and MapBC also. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it a lot, and yeah, I hope you have a nice day.
Thank you.